Okay, now we're still in New Hampshire. Our next speaker was, in fact, in the Air Force for 16 years, combat support. He has a PhD in Aerospace Engineering, and like a lot of veterans, he wants to get our troops out of there. And of course, right. And of course, we all see these ribbons that say support our troops, which we do, but who do the troops support? Who do they support? The one man that's going to get them out, Ron Paul. That said, let's have a big welcome for Dr. Jim Forsythe.
Well, I can't wear my uniform and make a political speech, unfortunately. I'll just place my desert boots here. I do that to remind us of all our soldiers who have served throughout our history and are currently bravely serving in the Middle East. On this historic day, I ask you to imagine that we are the 11,000 soldiers camped out with General George Washington at Valley Forge in the winter of 1777. Today, that's not hard to imagine. We come from every state in the Union. We are as young as 12 and as old as 60, and come from all walks of life. Look around at your fellow patriots. At the end of this winter, 1 out of 4 of you will be dead. By the end of winter, 1 out of 4 might be dead, and it might be you. Yet despite your tragic loss this winter, you'll be joined by others. And in 3 long, arduous years, you will defeat the British Empire despite overwhelming odds. You have come here today despite the risk of your life because you believe that liberty is a cause worth fighting for. In the words of a New Hampshire patriot, John Stark, you believe that we should live free or die. What a lot of people don't know is what he said right after that. He said, death is not the worst of evils. Okay, but all this sacrifice could have been for nothing if the Founding Fathers had chosen to set up a government as despotic as the one that they rebelled against. This is exactly what happened to the French and the Russians after their revolutions. They traded one tyrant for another. Instead, the Founding Fathers set up a constitutional republic, binding the government in the chains of the Constitution. Our first president, George Washington, voluntarily stepped down after 2 terms, setting up a tradition that lasted until President FDR. I agree. We owe an immense debt of gratitude to these men who risked everything and sacrificed so much. Many of them are pictured around the halls. We should heed their words and their warnings and reflect on how our country has lived up to their expectations. In Common Sense, the document that helped spark the revolution, Thomas Paine wrote, "Our plan is commerce, and that, well attended to, will secure us the peace and friendship of all Europe." In the Declaration of Independence, the founders laid out the train of abuses of the king. Several of the abuses dealt with the overly militaristic, mercantilistic approach of the British Empire. That's right. Several weeks before his farewell address, Washington succinctly stated his non-interventionist policy in a letter to James Monroe. Quote, "I have always given it as my decided opinion that no nation had a right to intermeddle in the internal concern of another, that everyone had a right to form and adopt whatever government they liked best to live under themselves." In his farewell address, he spent a great deal of time on the issue, concluding, "The great rule of conduct for us in regard to foreign nations is in extending our commercial relations to have with them as little political connection as possible." Thomas Jefferson later stated, "I have ever deemed it fundamental for the United States never to take active part in the quarrels of Europe. Their political interests are entirely distinct from ours. Their mutual jealousies, their balance of power, their complicated alliances, their forms and principles of government are all foreign to us. They are nations of eternal war. All their energies are expended in the destruction of the labor, property, and lives of their people. And he also said, never was so much false arithmetic employed on any subject as that which has been employed to persuade nations that it is in their best interest to go to war. These patriots believed that the proper role of the military was to defend the Union. They were willing to fight and to die for the liberty and for Union, but they were not willing to risk the lives of their fellow Americans for the sake of increasing American influence overseas. They had seen how the British mercantilistic form of government led to constant war and instead favored free trade and a non-interventionist foreign policy. They restrained the ability of the government to go to war by vesting the power to declare war in the legislative branch, since, as Madison wrote to Jefferson, the Constitution supposes what the history of all governments demonstrates, that the executive is the branch of power most interested in war, and it is the most prone to it. It has accordingly, with studied care, vested the question of war in the legislature. Now, fast forward to 1991. The Cold War has ended, and I'm a young Air Force second lieutenant driving to Texas on my way to pilot training, and the Gulf War begins. I'm too busy learning how to fly jet aircraft to really examine the cause of the war. Certainly our government knows what it's doing, but something doesn't seem quite right since I signed it to defend my country, and I'm not sure exactly how war in the Middle East is a direct threat to us. After graduating and getting assigned to KC-135 refueling aircraft, I received my first overseas assignment to Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, enforcing the no-fly zone over Iraq. We flew sorties daily next to the Iraqi border, refueling fighter aircraft who patrolled the southern no-fly zone. When I came home and told my friends about my trip to Saudi, the general reaction was, "Oh, I thought the war was over. Are we still over there?" Yes, we were, and I would go back 2 more times over the next 5 years, stopping at one of our bases in England on the way over. Between trips to Saudi Arabia, I would also go to France and Italy to fly combat support operations to enforce the no-fly zone in Bosnia. And I also got to sit alert and launch in support of transport operations into Somalia. It was a surreal experience, coming back from one foreign country to spend a few months with my kids before launching to yet another foreign country. I flew with a married couple that had a child. They could never be assigned overseas together since one of them needed to be at home with their child. So instead, they alternated overseas assignments, seeing each other for a few weeks before one or the other would go back overseas. We were at a wartime ops tempo, despite officially being at war with no one. I would earn 3 aerial achievement medals for flying combat support missions, despite the fact that America had not declared war with anyone. But the experience I will always remember is my flight into Dhahran, Saudi Arabia. I stayed at the Khobar Towers. 2 weeks later, terrorists would bomb the facility, killing 19 American soldiers. The reason given to us by our intelligence officers was that the Saudi people resented our being there, propping up what they saw as an American puppet government dictatorship. Whether or not this is true, it made me wonder why we were defending a country when the people of that country didn't want us there. It was a chilling precursor to 9/11, as 15 of the 19 hijackers were from Saudi Arabia. Even before the Khobar Towers bombing, we had been required to change into civilian clothes on the way to and from the airfield, so the threat had been known and anticipated. Yet politicians will say what most of us who have served in the Middle East know is a lie, that they only attack us because we are free. Although this may be part of it, things are not that simple. And those that deny that occupation is part of the motivation put my fellow soldiers at risk, as the Khobar Towers bombing will attest.